My name's Kerry Harman, and I'm an academic here at Birkbeck. And I've been working with home care workers in an effort to make their skills and experience more visible. And we've put together a great program today to try and keep doing that work. And we've got a great lineup of speakers. What you can see on the screen is the program for today. So if you just have a quick look through that, but I'll introduce each of the speakers in the order that they'll be speaking today. We have Ed Heerey, who's Professor of Employment Relations at Cardiff University. Then Lydia Hayes will be speaking, and Lydia is Professor of Law at the University of Kent. We have Caroline Weimer, who is a home care worker, and Caroline was a previous rep for the Greater London area in a national home care workers forum organised by Unison, and did some really good work in that role and continues to do wonderful work. We have Nadia Whittome, who some of you may have read Nadia's article a while ago in The Guardian. Nadia's the MP for Nottingham East and is a former care worker. And our last speaker will be Emily Rowe from the Living Wage Foundation. And Emily is leading a campaign at the moment, which is the Living Wage for Key Workers campaign, and she's going to be talking to us a little bit about that.
I'm part of a small team of people at Cardiff University who've been doing research on the Living Wage campaign. So we heard in the video that one of the defining characteristics of care work, that it is poorly paid. One response to that is this campaign to try and encourage employers to adopt a higher wage standard. People aren't familiar with it. Just explain what the living wage is. It's a voluntary wage standard which has emerged from the community organising movement in the UK and is promoted by a charity called the Living Wage Foundation. It's based on research into the expenditure needs of different types of low wage families, and the research is used to calculate an hourly rate, which is currently £9.30 an hour for the UK and £10.75 for London. So not a high rate, but better than, certainly significantly better than the statutory minimum wage. So one of the things that we've done is we've looked at the spread of this standard within social care. Now, we've defined social care in our research quite broadly to encompass residential care, home care, and childcare. So all different facets of the care sector. Living Wage campaign really got underway in 2011, and since then, nearly 400 employers have voluntarily signed up to the standard. That's about 5% of the 7,000 odd employers which have signed up in this period. These social care employers, they directly employ about 32,000, just over 1% of employees covered by the living wage standard. And they report that more than 10,500 workers have benefited. So the campaign has had some, substantial impact in raising pay for workers within this sector. Emphasise that the Living Wage campaign has been particularly impactful within social care. So if we look at other industries not generally characterised by low pay, then when employers adopt the standard, in combination, about 8% of workers gain from the employer signing up to the living wage. Social care, it's about 34%. In other low wage industries like retail, hospitality, and cleaning, 72%. So it really is, the campaign can really have a positive impact in these low wage industries. The research those also identified challenges to the spread of the living wage in social care. So the employers which have signed up are disproportionately not-for-profit employers, which many of which will have a social anti-poverty mission themselves, and that's why it's one of the reasons they've signed up. There's also a pattern within the data that niche providers, who are operating at the top of the social care marketplace, they're more likely to join than, if you like, care providers operating on local authority contracts, because they're a niche provider and they can more readily afford to pay high wages. What's particularly notable is the absence of large private employers, the chain providers of care homes or home care service. They're largely absent from this voluntary scheme. They've stayed away from it, continue to pay low wages in the main. And a final problem is that the wastage rate, that is employers signing up to the living wage and then dropping out again, is higher in industries like social care, other low wage industries as well. That's not the case with the residential care, but other branches of care, home care and childcare, particularly important or particularly noticeable. I think there's some implications of this pattern of findings. First of all, it shows campaigning to pressure or encourage employers, often through community mobilization, can be effective in spreading this wage standard through social care. As I said, more than 10,000 workers have benefited from the campaign since 2011. But clearly, this is an enormous industry within the UK, and it's not possible to resolve the problem of low pay, I believe, by recruiting one employer at a time. So there has to be some kind of top-down initiative. And I think what's interesting about the coronavirus crisis is that a number of proposals or initiatives have emerged to try and regulate or improve matters in the industry from the top down. So Emily will be talking about the Living Wage for Key Workers campaign in a minute. Another interesting proposal, I think, which was released last week from the Resolution Foundation, was that there should be a wages council, wages board, created for social care, which can establish higher rates of pay and core conditions of employment right across the sector. So that's what I've got to say just about the spread of the living wage within this sector. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Ed. That was great. So our next speaker is Nadia Whittome.
I undertook research last year, which was about the potential for professionalisation in adult social care and looking at what the effects of that might be on terms and conditions of work. Currently, I'm leading a research programme at Kent, which is looking at the regulation of social care, because all social care providers, the companies, are all regulated in law. And we're looking at how that regulation of care quality across England, Scotland and Wales might provide opportunities to improve terms and conditions of work. So looking at the idea that terms and conditions of work are the terms and conditions of care. Now, the work that we did for the all-party parliamentary group about professionalisation, well, their reporting drew heavily on our research in its initial phases. But the focus then changed, the focus of the all-party parliamentary group, from the idea of professionalisation to what they called the future of adult social care. And recommendations were made such as creating parity of esteem between health and social care, whatever that means, and encouraging the Secretary of State to wear an adult social care badge when making media appearances. So professionalisation of the care workforce in England, at least, based on the idea of registration of care workers, appears to have been pushed off the regulatory agenda by the change of government, by the election, and of course COVID. And I think we have to be clear that professionalisation in and of itself doesn't mean increased value for care work, and that we can't talk or thank or clap our way to a professionalisation of pay and terms of work. And I think we need to be very clear that a change in the way that we talk about care workers, a change in the discourse, doesn't change the material reality. And also that professionalisation of care workers by registration, like is happening in Wales and Scotland, that on its own is not necessarily progressive or emancipatory for care workers. It means that care workers are individually regulated, which without other mechanisms so that care workers are rewarded, paid, treated as professionals, listened to as professionals who have a professional voice and a right to be heard. Without that, there is the potential that the regulatory system, which regulates the care worker as an individual, actually becomes burdensome, is disciplinary, and is not emancipatory for care workers. So we can't think that professionalisation on its own is going to strengthen employment relationships or reverse the impact of privatisation. And for me, concerns about privatisation are not moral objections about a profit motive in care necessarily, or ideological objections about the ownership of care services. My deep objection to it from the work that I do with care workers is about the premise of privatisation, which has been harmful to care and to care workers. So privatisation has been about removing value from care workers' jobs, and not just hourly wages. It's been about removing the security of their contracts, any idea of an occupational pension, sick pay, paid regular training, proper disciplinary procedures, grievances, opportunities for whistleblowing in a safe and effective way, quality control issues like good supervision. All of this has been stripped away from care. And the other premise has been that although privatisation and the profit motive could mean that workers and service users were harmed, the idea was that regulation of care services meant that those people could be protected. So let's have a look what we've learned from this moment of COVID, what we've seen. We've seen that the degradation of care workers, their jobs and lack of respect is a public health issue. The lack of sick pay in care work, the way in which care workers have been very aware of the potential for cross-contamination between care settings and the community has happened because of difficulties in terms of self-isolating, because of fear of poverty, lack of PPE, confusion about when PPE should be used, and that although there has been a change in government policy where the government has said that they will allocate £600,000 to local authorities in order to make it so that care providers have resources to be able to provide sick pay and support other infection control measures, we've seen that it is so complex, the relationships of privatised companies employing care workers, and to actually get that money from government into the pockets of care workers, that is so complex. We can say it's another indication that privatisation has really failed, although the government is trying to hide privatisation from the public by persistently talking about care workers as though they are the same as NHS workers, which of course they are not anywhere near the same as NHS workers in the terms and conditions of their work. And what have we seen about this regulatory system, which is supposed to protect the safety of people who use services? Well, at a time when we needed safety to be protected the most, a time of a global pandemic, the inspection of care services was abandoned in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland on the 16th and 17th of March. This created care organisations, closed organisations. And we know that closed organisations are organisations in which neglect and abuse of workers and service users can take hold. So at the moment when we need safety, we see that the regulatory system is not at all what it says on the tin. So to talk about the future, Home care is the present of social care. It's the largest section of the social care industry, and it's also the future of care. So it's very important that we talk about home care. But home care is very, very poorly understood at policy level. And at the present moment of COVID, it's been especially hidden because there's been focus on care homes because of the desire from government to want to talk about social care and NHS as though they are the same. People understand NHS as hospitals, and care homes kind of look a little bit like hospitals. So the focus around adult social care has very much shifted during the coronavirus pandemic towards the idea that social care is care homes, which we know is a very limited picture of the sector. So we need to talk about home care a lot, and we also need to talk about the value of care workers' jobs as being about material value and hard cash, but we need to talk beyond hourly wages. So we also need to talk about pensions, sick pay, security of work, and about protecting the health and safety of care workers. And one of the reasons why this really matters is that I was talking to a care organiser recently who has been trying to organise a campaign for care workers to be paid £15 an hour. And she has been roundly criticised on social media by care workers for trying to begin this campaign on the grounds that she's being greedy. And if she thinks £15 an hour is a suitable wage, then she shouldn't really be in care work. And this is important that we recognise that there are issues to do with how care workers understand the value of their own labour. So although we have talked about care work as about key workers and applauded care workers, we shouldn't assume that this moment has meant that all care workers are going to want to assert a higher value in terms of wages. Some care workers will have seen the effect of the COVID crisis as to intensify the sense in which they see their work as a work of sacrifice and a labour of love. So to conclude, I think it's very important that we broaden the agenda of how we talk about the value of care work away from hourly wages. Whilst I fully appreciate the importance of living wage campaigns, I don't think the living wage is enough, because the living wage doesn't take into account issues to do with skill. The living wage is a campaign about equality and about human rights and about the value of all labour. It doesn't deal with issues to do with care workers' skills. And we need to talk more broadly about sick pay, about pensions, about the safety of care workers, about pay for training, about care workers being involved in negotiating their own terms and conditions of work. And I'll end it there. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Lydia. You've raised lots of issues that we can really, I think, get into a good discussion shortly. But before that happens, let's actually hear from a care worker, and I'll hand over to you, Caroline.
Hi everyone. I first started as a home help, just doing the basic laundry, housework and shopping, and then a few years into that it changed to home care. With that title came more work, as in giving personal care, but less time to do it. Over the years we get demoralised as care workers. So much work is put upon us, we're so time limited in what we do. For example, I've got a client that she gets half an hour. In that half an hour, I'm supposed to get her in the bath, out the bath, dry her, get her back into her seat, give her a breakfast, give her a medication, do all the basic things that we would normally do ourselves, but this person needs my help to help her do these things. These things that we take for granted. You can't do this in half an hour. I would struggle to do it in half an hour for myself. So with this, it's so time limited, you don't get a chance to have a normal conversation with them. You're trying to have a conversation with them while you're trying to give personal care. You're still trying to maintain the dignity for them. You're still trying to maintain independence for them. so that they do feel food in their own homes. We are trying to give them proper quality care that they deserve, but we can only do that if we're given the time and the right tools to work with in the first place. Yes, the care system is what it is at the moment, because I think a lot of it is to do with the private sector, where they give you just the hours that they've got rather than give you any contract. So that means that you just get paid on contact time. There's still companies out there that don't pay for your travelling. There's certain things that are not paid for. There is some companies that don't even provide PPE, that you have to buy it yourself, and that you have to pay for your own police check. All these things that some people just don't know about. And I think it's really, really sad that we live in today's world, and I feel undervalued as a carer, but I also feel very, very sorry for the people that I go to, because I can see this system's very broken and it needs to be fixed. And I think it needs to be fixed now rather than later on. And when this pandemic started, apart from me personally with no mask and, you know, do we wear one, don't we wear one, did we have any, you know, and all the PPE problems, yeah, not once was I asked about, do I need any extra time for clients because I might have to go and get their shopping, you know, the queues that were in the supermarket, the queues that were, you know, in the chemist for their medication. I was never asked, did they have, was there any certain health issues that I had? Did I feel safe going into clients with the health issues that I might have had? What about the health issues that they might have had? There was no contact. I was actually left to my own devices. To be honest, nothing changed for me in this pandemic. I just carried on as I normally would, given the time and the attention that they needed. I do think it's quite disgraceful that the elderly are not looked after much better than they are at the moment. It's not a crime to be old, but that's how they feel. Many of my service users will say to me, don't grow old. And I say to them, but I can't help growing old. And they said, but it's not a nice place to be old. And when you ask them why it's not a place to be old, it's because that when they can't do certain things, they lose that bit of independence. So you try and give them back that independence by helping them, but then they feel that they're a burden. And I think it's more to do with that when they're assessed as well, like, because they think they're a burden, they will turn around and say, oh, but I can do that. They're not assessed properly. That no one ever says to them, oh, come and show me, can you put the kettle on, how safe it is. You know, you have OTs, but they do that in the hospitals. But when they actually come home, they're only assessed there in a chair, and then they're left, and then it's, oh, like, you can have a carer for half an hour 3 or 4 times a day. I mean, we go in the morning and get them washed and dressed and breakfast and medication and go back there lunchtime. But most of all of this is microwave. Everything's microwave, because we haven't got the time to cook them anything. So basically their choices are taken away. I mean, I'd love to give them, you know, a baked potato and fresh vegetables and things like that, but it's just not possible to do that. And with also another issue that I found with this pandemic is with the laundries being shut, I couldn't do their washing. So I was bringing their washing home for them, taking it back. And also where the families can't come, it did put us under a lot of pressure to try and maintain their, you know, their basic things, you know, to make sure that they've got food and they've got their medication and they've got clean sheets and clean clothes. I mean, I work in the community, so I can only speak from that point of view. I don't know what it's like in a care home, but the issues are, in this, the changes that have happened over the years. Is really the time's been cut and the care's been cut. For anybody to give decent care, you need time, and you need to really speak to a carer. The social workers need to speak to the carer. The district nurses need to speak to the carer. We all need to be on the same page. What's best for that person that we're actually going into? Because at the end of the day, we all want what's best for that person, not what's best for the people that just write and say, oh, she can have half an hour or he can have 45 minutes. It's what's best for that person at the end of the day, not the paperwork, because at the end of the day they're classed as vulnerable adults. But how vulnerable do they have to be to get decent, good quality care? And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Caroline. You've just really, I think, made it so real for people. You always do, in terms of telling it how it is. So thank you very much for that. Okay, Nadia, we'll hand over to you. And Nadia's also worked as a care worker.
Thanks so much for inviting me to speak. I was really moved by Caroline, and also by the Invisible Work, Invisible Knowledges video. So much of that, as a former care worker myself, I could really relate to, particularly around having to do work to meet people's needs, because when people's funding is cut and their time is cut, their needs don't go away, and someone has to meet them, and that's always the lowest paid, most undervalued workers. It's care workers. I really like that you're focusing on care workers not being low skilled. You might have seen that before coronavirus took hold, I asked Priti Patel in the chamber which aspects of care work she considered to be low skilled, and unsurprisingly she couldn't answer, or wouldn't answer. Coming up next in Parliament is the immigration bill. We're not sure when that's coming back, but it will be shortly, before recess, we expect. And I've submitted an amendment to that bill that seeks to address that very problem of care workers being categorised as low skilled. Not only is this a bad policy in practical and economic terms, but more importantly, it's a bad policy morally, in workers' rights terms, and in the sense that it further stigmatises care work. I'm really keen for us to work together to galvanise the support and the attention that COVID has brought on the care sector, and to push the government for change. You would have seen that I was a care worker before I became an MP, and I returned to the front line when the pandemic broke out, because I wanted to be an extra pair of hands on the front line to my colleagues who I knew would be bearing the burden of this crisis. And you would have seen in the news that after I spoke out about shortages of PPE, even though I didn't mention the company that I was working for, and even though I never once spoke disparagingly of them, and in fact they themselves had asked me to speak about PPE, not long afterwards they told me that they no longer required my services, and because I was a 0 hours contract worker, I was effectively sacked without any kind of due process. Now, if this is what happens to a member of parliament with the privilege that I have, not just my platform, but also my financial security, that I wasn't relying on that job to feed my family or pay my rent, you can imagine the kind of immense pressure and intimidation and precarity that all care workers face all around the country. So I called out to care workers across the country to contact me if they had similar experiences, and my inbox was flooded with people who have similar experiences, worse experiences of speaking out and being sacked, of being too scared to speak out for fear of being sacked, all sorts of really horrendous stories. And I invited them to a Zoom call last Friday during Carers Week with IWGB, the trade union, to discuss this and to discuss working together. And we've set up a little working group now. And I'd be keen to have your input on that as well, about how we make a change in this sector, how we tackle the scourge of low pay, of care workers being chronically undervalued, and the answer to that being structural and definitely nothing to do with a care badge. Because this issue is a feminist issue, it's a social justice issue, it's a migrants' rights issue. And what COVID has done is shone a light on the fact that there are cracks everywhere in the system, people are falling through them, and we've got to reimagine what care work looks like. And that has to be about maximising people's autonomy and choice, not just speaking about people as being vulnerable, but about being people who are marginalised and for whom the system just does not work for them and further marginalises them. I'm aware that I'm running out of time, but certainly after COVID and during the crisis as well, the government is going to have a reckoning for letting people down, workers and receivers of care, and for not just its response over the past few months, but the fact that 10 years of cuts, of underinvestment, of fragmentation and privatisation resulted in the crisis that we're seeing in care homes now.
Thanks so much, Nadia. And just such as, I don't want to start the discussion up yet, but yes, and you know, the structural issues are absolutely key. So we'll now move over to Emily, and who is from the Living Wage Foundation. So Emily.
Yeah, just for background, I work at an organisation called the Living Wage Foundation, which accredits businesses and organisations that agree to pay staff the real living wage rather than the government minimum, or what is called so-called national living wage. And I'm just going to use this couple of minutes really to talk about the social care campaign, which it's really been spearheaded by an organisation called Citizens UK, which some of you might be familiar with. And we work really closely with them at the foundation because they founded the Living Wage campaign, as Ed mentioned. But I think before I just get into the current campaign, I thought it might be helpful just to give a bit of background to the wider Living Wage campaign and how it started. So as I said, it was community organising charity Citizens UK that founded the campaign around 20 years ago now. And it all started when organisers listened to the concerns of cleaners in East London and the city, and found that actually so many of them were working multiple jobs on the minimum wage and struggling to put food on the table for their families. The government minimum wage just wasn't enough. So Citizens UK work with those cleaners and others in the community to campaign for businesses to pay a real living wage. And as Ed mentioned, it's independently calculated based on what you need to live, rather than a percentage of median earnings as the minimum wage is calculated. So yeah, a key part of Citizens UK's campaign is this listening stage and really hearing the concerns of people in the communities, of what is affecting them and what they think needs to change. And this was no different at the start of lockdown. Citizens UK conducted this huge listening campaign to hear how communities were being affected by COVID. And low pay and insecure work was one of the main issues that was being raised time and time again. And it was particularly those workers, key workers on the front line who we heard from, who were either not getting sick pay, or they didn't have PPE, or they were struggling financially because they were in minimum wage jobs. And 1.3 million of those key workers are actually earning below the real living wage and in insecure work. So they don't have a secure contract, or they're on a 0 hours contract. And it just seemed so ironic that, you know, every Thursday we were clapping for these workers, and the whole country got behind delivery drivers, carers, supermarket staff, cleaners who were so often, as we've discussed, referred to as low skilled, but our country was relying on them to keep us going and safe during this pandemic. So that's really where the Living Wage for Key Workers campaign started. And the main focus of our campaign at the moment is on the social care sector and pay. And to Lydia's point as well, I mean, we know that pay isn't the only issue that affects care workers, especially at the moment with PPE and sick pay. But our campaign is about a real living wage. And what we're calling for is immediate action from the government for a new financial settlement for the social care sector. We're asking for the government to give an additional 1.4 billion to the sector so that all employees in social care can be paid a real living wage. Currently, 58% of the care profession aren't earning a real living wage. And importantly, that's, you know, not just carers in care homes, it's everyone in the sector, including as well the cleaners and cooks in care homes and domiciliary carers. So there's a link to the website which has all the information about the campaign. Will be updated in the next couple of days, actually, with some more information about how to get involved. But we're really hoping to use this opportunity of the Chancellor's announcement in July, and we're really pushing now to try and get the settlement announced in that announcement. So there's, as I said, on the website, there's different ways you can get involved, and my email address is there as well if anyone wants to ask any questions or wants to work together. But yeah, I'll just wrap up there.
Thanks again, Emily. Thanks very much.